South Africa's unemployment rate for the third quarter of this year fell by 1.4 percentage points to 32.1%, and that's down from 33.5% in quarter two. The expanded definition of unemployment, meanwhile, decreased marginally to 12.2 million people. The Eastern, Western Cape and the Northwest saw the biggest increases in employment, but jobs were shed in Gauteng and in KwaZulu-Natal. More people were employed in both the formal and informal sectors. Discouraged workers, those discouraged from looking for jobs, jumped by 5% to 160,000. And the youth remaining the most vulnerable in the labour market, while the total number of jobless young people decreased by 171,000 to 4.8 million. The youth unemployment rate remains high at 45%. And of course, that is under the official definition, not the expanded definition. It is much higher than that if you look at the expanded definition of unemployment.
In the third quarter of 2023, we can see that we gained 399 jobs, almost 400,000 jobs. And then we went down by 22,000. We received again 22,000 jobs, and we lost again 22,000 jobs in the last quarter. And now we have gained 294,000. So these gains that have taken us to 16.9 million, with those that are unemployed sitting at 8 million, tell us that the unemployment rate for the third quarter of 2024 is sitting at 32.1%. What it means is that it has gone down by 1.4 percentage points from the previous quarter. And this was largely driven by the fact that we have seen employment increasing by 294,000 from the previous quarter to 16.9 million. And unemployment has decreased from 8.4 million to 8 million. Of course, while we have seen the discouraged work seekers increasing by 160,000.
Lots of numbers there, but let's unpack them with Mathew Parks, who is Cosatu's spokesperson. Newton Masuku speaks on behalf of SAFTU. To both of our guests, thanks very much indeed for coming on. Newton, I want to begin with SAFTU's reaction to these unemployment numbers. The Statistician General telling us that unemployment is getting better and it's getting better faster. Is it fast enough?
No, it is not. I mean, the context must be provided here. And if you want context, you will find it in the in the projections of the Treasury itself in the last medium-term budget policy statement. And it pointed out that it projects that in the next 3 years, the economy will grow by an average of 1.6%. Now, economists and other experts have demonstrated that you are going to need an annual growth of 3% for you to be able to absorb 500,000 new entrants into the labor market. Now, if you take those figures and look at the figures that we have now, measly 294,000 jobs that have been created, which, by the way, the statistics, the report itself indicates that it's an annual thing. In other words, in the third quarter annually since 2019, employment has been shown to be to increase. Then you begin to see that you are looking at a bleak picture, given the fact that in the next 3 years we're expecting the economy to grow by 1.6%, and therefore it will not be able to absorb even a fraction of the unemployment statistics that we have.
Yeah. So you're saying, Newton, that we see this increase in quarter three year after year?
Yes, it is indicated by the report itself. In other words, in fact, this very increase, it's indicated by the report itself that indeed year after year since 2019, we would see an increase in the third quarter, but as time goes on, then you see another decrease. So perhaps it has to do with the festivities and the ramping up of the economy somewhat as we are headed towards the festive season.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And Mathew Parks from Cosatu, it sounds like, and it certainly appears just looking at the numbers, like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back in terms of unemployment.
Yeah, look, so we have mixed feelings. Any decrease in unemployment, whatever amount, we must welcome that. It's relief for those workers who can find work. So I think we appreciate that. But having said that, I don't think any sober person would want to celebrate an unemployment rate of 41.9% or a youth unemployment of about 70%. I think for us, those are our single greatest national crises. They are a ticking time bomb that threatens the entire nation. And yes, one appreciates any decrease in unemployment. One doesn't expect unemployment to fall overnight. And, if you look at the last 3 quarters where you saw unemployment increasing each quarter, yes, no, that is positive. But we still have a crisis of 4 out of 10 South Africans who can't find work. And I think for us, it's about what do we do? So this is good news, great. But we need to do much more to ensure Eskom's got the support it needs to provide reliable and affordable electricity. That's key to all workplaces. We've got to do much, much more to rebuild Transnet, because that's key to securing and to creating thousands of jobs in the mining, the manufacturing, the agricultural sectors. Similarly, Metro Rail has done well to reopen many of its train lines, but again, it's got far to go, so let's give them more support, as well as to make sure we really rebuild municipalities, because that's key to ensuring that the infrastructure program of government is spent. And all of these things help to reduce the network obstacles to growing the economy. And I think whilst we appreciate, focus on these critical areas, Michelle, it's also critical that when we have the budget at Parliament in February, that we drastically ramp up the presidential promised stimulus, because it's been madness that we've cut it by 90%, yet youth unemployment has been rising. We need to have a much more aggressive approach to stimulating the economy, because if one takes, as Newton is saying, the Treasury's guesstimates for economic growth for the next 4 years of 1.7%, give or take, that's half of what we need to begin to absorb young people into the labor market and to really begin to making a dent. So I think for us, good news today, but given where we are, we've got a lot more that needs to be done, and we should not be complacent given the scale of unemployment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that 70% youth unemployment number is perhaps the most worrying number of all when it comes to our unemployment discussion, Newton, and our ability to retain those 294,000 jobs that were gained in the third quarter. The upcoming local government elections, we're just moments away in political terms of the local government elections. Hopefully that is also part of the Kickstarter, part of what we need in terms of cutting the red tape, for example, when it comes to small businesses and the like, the things that we need to support to grow the economy.
Yeah, but our contention is that, we've made this point ad nauseum now, that for as long as the macroeconomic trajectory of the economy is not changing, we are not going to see changes. In fact, the National Treasury itself is hell-bent on embarking on austerity, the budget cuts. There are over 70,000 jobs in the public sector that have not, vacant posts that have not been filled. In other words, in an economy that is refusing to grow, in an economy, therefore, that is unable to absorb the unemployed, you have a state that continues to cut back on expenditure. And for as long as you have that, while on the other hand, you are losing jobs in the manufacturing sector, you are losing jobs in transport, or you are even beginning to lose jobs in a sector that already was employing less, the financial sector, you begin to see that you are in trouble. So our contention is, for as long as the fiscal policy is such that it is restrictive, it is intended to cut budgets in health, in education, and so on. For as long as the monetary policy is restrictive, ramping up interest rates, making sure that it throttles businesses, you are not going to see any change. And this is not merely an ideological position, but it is reflected in the figures of the Treasury itself, where, as I have said, it indicates that it expects, give or take, a growth of 1.7% in the coming 3 years, when in actual fact we need an upward of 3% to be able to absorb it. So this is not a cynical perspective or a pessimistic perspective. It is based on the empirical evidence provided to us, in fact, by the Treasury itself. So we are not hopeful at all for as long as the trajectory is as it is.
So what raft of policy changes is needed, Newton?
Our contention is that the state must spend more into the economy instead of cutting back. In other words, you have what we call the multiplier effect, where as the state spends into the economy begins to grow, and you begin to narrow even the debt to GDP ratio that they are obsessed about. So we are saying you can't...
Which is now well over 70%, right?
Indeed, but the debt to GDP ratio is a ratio of the growth of the economy vis-a-vis the debt that the country is incurring. And for as long as you are not spending into the economy, you will not grow the economy, and therefore you will not shrink the debt to GDP ratio. So we are saying spend into the economy, into health, into education, into public services, so that our people can be able to access these services. But also in doing so, we are expanding employment, and therefore we are going to expand the revenue stream, and you'll be able to shrink the debt to GDP ratio. For as long as you are cutting while the private sector is not investing, you will not see a growth in any way, shape, or form in the economy.
Mathew Parks, what's Cosatu's take on this issue?
Yeah, look, I don't think it's fundamentally different from what Newton is saying. I think us is about fixing the basics. And yes, look, we do appreciate, we don't want to fall into a debt trap of many other African countries. But I think for us, where we diverge with Treasury is when Treasury says that our solution to grow the economy is to cut expenditure. And I think for us, it's a couple-fold why we oppose that approach. One is that an economy which is bleeding, which is struggling, which is stagnant, it needs to be stimulated. And that's the model that other industrial nations have pursued, whether it's the United States or Europe or China, with success. I think for us also about rebuilding the state, fixing the state, whether it's Eskom or Transnet, whether it's Metro Rail, other SOEs, whether it's municipalities or departments. Because if you fix the state and the public and the municipal services and the SOE services, that enables the economy to take off. Businesses can't take off if Eskom is not working, if Metro Rail is struggling, if Transnet is imploding. The third one is about creating a path to employment. We've got to tackle unemployment because, again, you're not going to grow the economy, people are unemployed. So we've got to deal with the hard issues, but simply to treat the most strategic tool that government has got, which is the budget, as an accounting exercise, cutting expenditure when the economy is choking, that for us has been tried many, many times, and yet we are still stuck with 1% economic growth. We're still stuck with 4 out of 10 South Africans unemployed. So I think for us, what we're simply saying is not to be mad, it's just to follow what the US, what China have done, stimulate the economy, fix the state, create employment. If you do all of that, that generates the company taxes, the VAT, the income taxes the state requires to fund public services, to pay the debt, etc. So I think Treasury basically wants to put the cart in front of the horse. We would rather keep the horse in front of the cart and actually feed the horse and make sure it can pull the cart. But I think for us to continue on the path of business as usual, when we have a 42% unemployment rate, that is a recipe for national suicide. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it feels in a way, Newton, that for years we've been talking around in circles on the unemployment number, right? That youth group of those aged 15 to 34, still the most vulnerable in the labour market. And you've both talked about that being a ticking time bomb. It's also a massive lost opportunity for our country, isn't it?
Indeed, it's a complete wastage of, as they say, human capital, as it were. And the economy is not even functioning at full capacity. So you have over the majority of people who are unemployed. On the one hand, I mean, the working class in the main, who are unemployed on the one hand, and on the other, you have an economy that is not even fully functioning at full capacity. So you have two things. On the one hand, people are unemployed. On the other, you have an idling industrial capacity, as it were. The economy is not producing. So it's a wastage. But not only that, it has serious social, political ramifications in society. In other words, as you have said, it's a ticking time bomb. It's very unsustainable. And the reason we have spoken ad nauseam and in cycles, as it were, is because from 1996, when the ANC-led government adopted GEAR, up to this day, it has pursued these neoliberal policies, which are intended, indeed, to cut budgets, to raise interest rates in an attempt to appease finance capital and all these things. But they have not yet yielded fruits. And that's the reason we are where we are, and that's the reason we are speaking ad nauseam without any progress. Yeah. So our contention is that for as long as we do not change course, there will never be any change. We'll continue to speak. But in addition to that, you are stoking the flames of social unrest sooner rather than later. Besides, there's no economy in the history of the planet that has ever developed through the path that is being prescribed by the Treasury and the South African Reserve Bank. I dare them to demonstrate which economy on the planet that has ever developed by a state that is cutting social spending and all these other things.
Mathew Parks, your final thoughts on the load shedding issue. You know, when we saw the Q2 results, by that stage, we had put load shedding on the back burner, so to speak, for 3 months. We're now at 6 months without load shedding. Did you hope there would have been more of an impact on the employment numbers?
Look, and this is exactly why we pushed as Cosatu in 2019 for a debt relief package for Eskom. We've seen fantastic work by Eskom, and I think we must really commend the workers of Eskom, of municipalities. A year ago, we had 12 hours of load shedding a day. We've not had it for 6 months. So I think we must really applaud it. But I think we must not also rest on our laurels. Eskom is still a very fragile state. Our municipal debt owed to Eskom is about approaching 90 billion rand. And if you don't address that, Eskom is not a viable entity. So we need to have a frank and a brutal conversation about ensuring that municipalities, in fact, all consumers, even departments, companies, etc., everybody must pay Eskom what is owed, because otherwise it can't be viable. But I think we do appreciate it. And Eskom shows you, with the focus by the states on tackling corruption, wasteful expenditure, dealing with the debt, emphasizing the maintenance program, bringing on board new generation capacity, that you can turn the state around. And if you apply that model to transit, to metro rail, to municipalities, you can do it. The South African Revenue Service too shows that if you fill vacancies, you appoint competent management, you remove corrupt criminals, you invest in the institutional capacity, be it IT or infrastructure, it can turn things around. So that's what we're emphasizing. Don't take shortcuts by cutting the state or weakening its capacity to deliver services the economy depends upon. Rather, invest on it, fix it, and you'll retrieve much greater rewards than the billions of rands you spent. You'll, in fact, recover many, many tenfolds what you spent if you just fix the fundamental basics.
All right, trade union reaction there from Cosatu and SAFTU on the unemployment numbers. Mathew Parks is with Cosatu. Newton Masuku is the SAFTU spokesperson. To both of our guests, thanks very much indeed for joining us this afternoon.